Whispers always preceded Arthur Rossi. Whenever the notoriously ruthless underboss stepped into the Oak Haven, Chicago's elite suddenly found the floorboards fascinating. Staff vanished, managers panicked. Nobody dared approach his corner booth. Nobody, that is, until a 22-year-old waitress named Khloe walked up with a notepad and a steady smile. Friday nights at the Oak Haven were a symphony of clinking crystal, low jazz, and the scent of dry-aged Wagyu mingling with expensive perfumes. Located just off the Magnificent Mile, the restaurant catered to CEOs, politicians, and celebrities. But at exactly 8 o'clock, the atmosphere in the dining room shifted. The ambient chatter dropped a decibel. The maître d', a usually unflappable man named Richard, paled dramatically near the hostess stand. Arthur Rossi had arrived. He didn't kick open the doors or announce his presence. True power rarely needs an introduction. He simply walked in, flanked by two men whose tailored Brioni suits couldn't hide the bulk of their shoulders or the vigilant sweep of their eyes. Arthur himself wore a bespoke charcoal three-piece suit, a Patek Philippe Nautilus resting quietly on his left wrist. He was a man in his late 30s with sharp, patrician features, dark hair touched with the faintest silver at the temples, and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. The FBI called him the ghost of the Chicago syndicate. The streets called him a ruthless tactician who had orchestrated the hostile takeover of the Southside docks without leaving a single fingerprint. Richard scrambled to intercept them, bowing slightly. "Mr. Rossi, right this way. Your usual booth is ready." Arthur didn't speak. He offered a single curt nod and followed Richard to the secluded corner booth bathed in shadow, strategically positioned with a clear view of the entrance and both exits. In the kitchen, chaos reigned. "Where the hell is Sarah?" Richard hissed, storming through the swinging doors, his face slick with sweat. "Sarah called in from Northwestern Memorial," one of the sous chefs replied, plating a lobster tail. "Burst appendix. She's in surgery." "Are you kidding me?" Richard grabbed his thinning hair. "Sarah is the only one who serves that table. He likes her. She knows not to hover. She knows he drinks his Macallan neat with exactly 2 drops of distilled water." "Who is taking Section 4? The wait staff, usually competitive sharks fighting for high-tipping VIPs, suddenly found themselves incredibly busy polishing silverware or checking their order pads. Everyone knew the stories. 3 years ago, a waiter had spilled a drop of red wine on the cuff of one of Arthur's associates. The waiter wasn't fired, but he mysteriously moved to Ohio the next day and refused to ever speak of Chicago again. "I'm not doing it," whispered Todd, a veteran server. "I have a mortgage. I like my kneecaps." "I'll take it." The kitchen fell dead silent. Richard spun around to look at Khloe. She was 22, putting herself through a grueling nursing program at Loyola University, and drowning in a sea of debt that wasn't even hers. She wore the standard Oak Haven uniform, crisp white button-down, black vest, black tie, and her dark blonde hair was pulled back into a neat, tight bun. "Khloe, you've been here 3 months," Richard said, his voice trembling. "You don't understand who that man is." "He's a guy who wants a steak, Richard," Khloe said smoothly, grabbing a silver tray. "And I have rent due on Tuesday, plus a tuition installment. If he tips like Sarah says he does, I'm taking the table." Richard looked like he was about to faint, but he had no other options. Don't look him directly in the eye for too long, don't interrupt him, and, for the love of God, don't ask him how his day was. Khloe balanced the tray on her palm and pushed through the swinging doors. As she crossed the dining room floor, she felt the oppressive weight of the corner booth. The 2 associates, whom she would later learn were named Tommy and Enzo, tracked her every movement like hawks. Khloe kept her breathing steady. She had survived a chaotic childhood, a runaway mother, and an older brother who treated his life like a casino. A man in a nice suit wasn't going to make her crumble. She approached the table. Arthur was looking at his phone, his expression unreadable. "Good evening," Khloe said, her voice clear and entirely devoid of the trembling reverence he was accustomed to. "Welcome to the Oak Haven. Can I start you off with something from the bar, or shall I bring the Macallan 25, neat, with 2 drops of distilled water?" Arthur's thumb stopped scrolling. He slowly raised his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The silence stretched. Tommy shifted his weight, his hand subtly resting near his jacket pocket. Khloe didn't flinch. She held the tray perfectly level, meeting Arthur's gaze with polite, professional expectation. "You aren't Sarah," Arthur stated. His voice was a low baritone, quiet but carrying a dangerous edge. "Sarah is recovering from an emergency appendectomy, sir," Khloe replied evenly. "I'm Khloe. I'll be taking care of you tonight." Arthur studied her face, Perhaps looking for the micro-expressions of terror he saw in everyone else, politicians, rival bosses, cops. He found none. Just a tired, determined girl who needed to do her job. The Macallan, Arthur said, finally, and bring a bottle of the Chateau Margaux 2015 for the table. Let it breathe. Right away. Khloe offered a polite nod and pivoted, walking away without rushing. Back at the table, Enzo leaned in, got some nerve, that one. Want me to tell Richard to get someone else? No, Arthur murmured, his eyes lingering on the swinging kitchen doors. Let her work. For the next 2 hours, Khloe delivered flawless service. She didn't hover, but her water glass was never empty. She recommended the bone-in ribeye over the filet, confidently arguing that the marbling would pair better with the heavy tannins of the Bordeaux. When Enzo accidentally knocked his steak knife onto the floor, Khloe was there with a fresh one wrapped in a linen napkin before he could even signal for it. She treated Arthur Rossi not like a monster, nor like a king, but like a man. It was an experience he hadn't had in a decade. When it was time for the check, Khloe placed the leather booklet on the table. The total was $1,450. Arthur placed a black titanium American Express Centurion card onto the tray. When Khloe returned with the receipt, he signed it with a heavy gold Mont Blanc pen. He didn't look up as she thanked him and cleared the final glasses. Only when the booth was empty did she open the leather booklet. Inside was the signed merchant copy, the total closed out. Tucked underneath the receipt was a stack of crisp $100 bills. 50 of them, $5,000. Resting on top of the money was a heavy, matte black cardstock business card. It had no company name, no title, no address. Just a single name, embossed in silver, Arthur Rossi. Beneath it was a private phone number. Khloe stared at the card, her heart skipping a beat. It wasn't a proposition. It felt like a silent acknowledgement. She pocketed the money and the card, feeling a strange, cold shiver run down her spine. The euphoria of the massive tip faded the moment Khloe stepped out of the warm glow of the Oak Haven and into the biting chill of the Chicago night air. It was 1:30 a.m. She wrapped her wool coat tightly around herself, her exhausted feet aching in her sensible black shoes as she walked the 3 blocks down an alleyway to where she parked her beat-up 2008 Honda Civic. She was mentally calculating her finances. The $5,000 would cover rent, the tuition late fee, and leave enough to finally get the car's heater fixed. For the first time in months, she let herself smile. That smile vanished when she turned the corner. 2 men were leaning against the hood of her Civic. The street lamp overhead flickered, casting long, menacing shadows. Khloe stopped dead in her tracks. One of the men pushed himself off the hood. He was tall, heavily built, wearing a leather jacket and a flat cap. Declan. He belonged to the O'Connor syndicate, the Irish faction that ran the illegal sportsbooks and loan sharking operations out of Canaryville. Evening, Khloe, Declan said, his voice thick with a forced, jovial lilt that made her stomach churn. The second man, a silent enforcer with a scarred jaw, moved to block the entrance of the alley. Declan, Khloe said, forcing her voice to remain steady, though her hands were suddenly icy. What do you want? I don't have anything to do with Ben. See, that's where you're wrong, sweetheart, Declan sighed, taking a slow step toward her. Family is family. Your brother Ben has gone missing. He stopped answering his phone, stopped going to his shift at the auto shop, and he owes Mr. O'Connor a lot of money. $50,000, to be exact. Bad bets on the ponies. I don't have $50,000, and I haven't spoken to Ben in a month. Khloe backed up a step, her mind racing. I don't have that kind of money. We know you work at a very nice restaurant, Declan smiled, showing a chipped front tooth. We also know you have a nice little nursing career lined up. Be a shame if something happened to your hands before you could get your degree. The silent enforcer stepped closer. You have until Monday night, Khloe, Declan said, dropping the smile, his eyes turning hard and dead. Find your brother, or find the money. If neither shows up, we start taking it out in collateral, and we'll start with you. They shoved past her, purposely clipping her shoulder so hard she stumbled against the brick wall. Khloe slid down the cold brick, her breathing erratic. She dug her hands into her coat pockets, her fingers brushing against the wad of cash she had just earned. $5,000. It was a fortune to her, but a drop in the bucket of $50,000. Her fingers then brushed against something else, the stiff, matte black business card. Arthur Rossi? She pulled it out, staring at the silver lettering in the dim alley light. Going to the police was useless. The O'Connors had half the precinct on their payroll. and going to the cops usually meant signing your own death warrant. Going to Arthur Rossi, however, that was making a deal with the devil. But right now, the devil was the only one with enough power to tell the demons to back off. The next evening, Khloe was back at the Oak Haven. She hadn't slept. She had spent the day calling every associate, friend, and ex-girlfriend Ben had, but her brother had vanished completely. She was practically vibrating with anxiety as she tied her apron. "You look terrible," Richard noted as she passed the hostess stand. "Are you sick? Don't get the VIPs sick." "I'm fine," she lied. She pushed through the doors to the main dining room, scanning her section, and then her blood ran cold. Sitting at a table for two in her section was Declan. He was dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit him, smirking as he sipped a martini. He wasn't there to eat. He was there to remind her that she was being watched. He raised his glass to her in a mock toast. Khloe felt a wave of dizziness hit her. She retreated to the service station, gripping the stainless steel counter until her knuckles turned white, trying to fight off a panic attack. "Problem?" The voice was low, smooth, and dangerously close. Khloe gasped and spun around. Arthur Rossi was standing near the hallway leading to the private dining rooms. He wasn't flanked by his usual guards, though she had no doubt they were close by. He wore a navy blue tailored suit tonight, looking entirely out of place near the dirty dish bins, yet completely commanding the space. It was highly unusual for him to dine there 2 nights in a row. "Mr. Rossi," Khloe stammered, trying to compose herself. "I'm sorry, I didn't see you come in." Arthur didn't look at her face. He was looking at her hands, which were visibly shaking. He then looked past her, through the small service window that offered a view of the dining floor. His eyes locked onto Declan's table. Arthur belonged to the Italian syndicate. The O'Connors were Irish. They had a tenuous truce in the city, an invisible line drawn at Madison Street. But Arthur knew exactly who Declan was. "You were steady enough to pour an 18-year-old scotch perfectly yesterday," Arthur said, his gaze shifting back to Khloe. "Tonight, you look like a frightened rabbit. And the muscle for the O'Connor family is sitting in your section, drinking gin he can't afford." Khloe swallowed hard. "It's nothing, sir. Just a family issue." Arthur stepped closer. The scent of bergamot and expensive tobacco washed over her. "The O'Connors are not known for family issues, Khloe. They are known for breaking legs over bad gambling debts. Who owes them? You?" "My brother," she whispered, the truth spilling out before she could stop it. The sheer authority radiating from the man demanded honesty. "He owes them $50,000. They gave me until Monday." Arthur's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes darkened. He looked back out the service window at Declan, who was now rudely snapping his fingers at a busboy. "You didn't call the number I left you," Arthur noted quietly. I didn't know what the cost of that call would be," Khloe admitted, looking him in the eye. "People like you don't do favors for free." A faint ghost of a smirk played on Arthur's lips. It was the first time she had seen anything resembling amusement from him. "You're smarter than your brother. That's good." Arthur reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and typed a brief message. He slipped the phone back away and looked at Khloe. "Serve him his dinner," Arthur commanded smoothly. "Treat him with the exact same disrespect he is showing this establishment. If he asks for bread, ignore him. If he asks for the check, make him wait." "He'll kill me," Khloe breathed. "He won't touch a hair on your head," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a register that made the hair on her arms stand up. "Because you are going to tell him that your debt has been purchased." Khloe stared at him, bewildered. "Purchased? By who?" "By me." Arthur stepped back, adjusting his cuffs. "Tell him to take it up with the Rossi family. Now, go do your job, Khloe." Arthur walked away, disappearing into the private dining suite, leaving Khloe standing in the service station with her heart hammering against her ribs. She had just traded a $50,000 debt to violent loan sharks for a debt to the most dangerous man in Chicago, and she had absolutely no idea how Arthur Rossi expected her to pay him back. Khloe smoothed her apron, her hands finally steady. The terror that had gripped her in the service station was replaced by a cold, surreal clarity. She walked back onto the dining floor, the ambient noise of clinking silverware and jazz returning to her ears. Declan was slouched in his chair, tapping a heavy gold ring against his water glass. "About time, sweetheart," he sneered as she approached. "I'll take the veal, and you can bring me another—" "I'm not taking your order, Declan," Khloe interrupted, her voice entirely flat. Declan's sneer faltered, replaced by a dark, dangerous scowl. Excuse me? You want me to drag you out of here by your hair right now? You have until Monday, remember? I don't owe you anything, Khloe said, leaning in just slightly, keeping her voice low so the surrounding tables wouldn't hear. And neither does Ben. Declan let out a harsh bark of a laugh. Did you magically find 50 grand in the back alley? No, Khloe replied, her eyes flicking toward the glass partition of the private dining rooms. Your debt has been purchased. Declan followed her gaze. His laughter died instantly. Standing in the shadows of the private suite, visible only through the narrow glass panels, was Tommy. Arthur Rossi's enforcer wasn't doing anything overt. He was simply standing there, his arms crossed over his massive chest, staring directly at Declan. Declan swallowed, the swagger vanishing from his posture. Purchased? By who? Take it up with the Rossi family, Khloe said, echoing Arthur's exact words. Now, if you aren't going to order, I need this table for paying customers. For a second, she thought Declan might strike her. His face flushed a mottled purple, and his jaw locked. But the Irish syndicate knew the rules. Madison Street was the border. The Oakhaven was firmly in Italian territory, and Arthur Rossi was not a man who bluffed. Declan threw a crumpled $20 bill onto the table for his drink, stood up abruptly, and shoved his way out of the restaurant without looking back. Khloe let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 24 hours. She had survived the night, but as the adrenaline crashed, the reality of her new situation settled like lead in her stomach. She traded a monster in a cheap suit for the devil in bespoke tailoring. At 2 a.m., her shift finally ended. Khloe stepped out the back door into the freezing alley, bracing herself for the cold walk to her car. Miss Khloe. She jumped. A sleek, black Lincoln Navigator was idling next to the dumpsters. Tommy stepped out from the driver's side, his massive frame blocking the streetlight. Mr. Rossi requested I give you a ride, Tommy rumbled. It wasn't an offer, it was a directive. My car is just down the street, she tried. Your car has a busted alternator, and it's 10 degrees out, Tommy replied calmly, opening the rear door. Get in. Khloe hesitated, then climbed into the plush, heated leather interior. The partition to the front seats was down. They drove in silence, leaving the glittering skyline of downtown Chicago behind and heading north on DuSable Lakeshore Drive, toward the affluent, heavily wooded suburbs of Lake Forest. 45 minutes later, the SUV turned down a private, tree-lined driveway, stopping before a massive wrought iron gate. 2 armed guards inspected the vehicle before the gate swung open, revealing a sprawling limestone estate that looked more like a fortress than a home. Tommy led her through the grand foyer, past priceless oil paintings and marble floors, down a long corridor to a heavy mahogany door. He knocked once and opened it. Arthur Rossi was sitting behind a massive desk, nursing a glass of amber liquid. The room smelled of old paper, leather, and the faint, smoky scent of a dying fire in the hearth. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie. The top 2 buttons of his white shirt were undone, revealing a glimpse of a dark tattoo on his collarbone. He looked exhausted. Sit, Arthur commanded, gesturing to a leather wingback chair opposite him. Khloe sat, keeping her posture rigid. You got Declan to back off. Thank you. I didn't do it out of charity, Khloe, Arthur said, his dark eyes fixing on hers. $50,000 is pocket change to my family, but the O'Connors were pushing their boundaries, operating in my territory. Buying your brother's debt was a convenient way to remind them where the lines are drawn. Then we're even? She asked hopefully. Arthur let out a low, humorless laugh. We are far from even. You owe me $50,000, and I am collecting. Khloe's heart sank. I can pay you a few hundred a month. I don't want your money, Arthur cut her off. He stood up, walking slowly around the desk. He leaned against the edge, towering over her. I ran a background check on you the moment you didn't flinch at my table yesterday, Khloe Davis. 22. Top of your nursing cohort at Loyola. Clean record. No ties to the streets, no addictions, no loose lips. Khloe stared at him, unnerved by how thoroughly he had dissected her life in less than a day. What does my nursing degree have to do with this? Arthur's expression tightened. A flash of genuine vulnerability crossed his features before he ruthlessly suppressed it. My father, Giovanni, is the head of this family. He is 78 years old, and his heart is failing. If the O'Connors, or the feds, or even my own captains find out how weak he is, it will start a bloodbath in Chicago. I cannot trust the syndicate doctors. They gossip. They have shifting loyalties. He leaned closer. the scent of bergamot wrapping around her. I need a private nurse, someone who lives in this house, monitors his medication, manages his oxygen, and keeps him comfortable. Someone completely off the grid, who the FBI won't recognize. Someone I own. Khloe's breath hitched. You want me to drop out of school? I want you to transfer to online classes, Arthur corrected. You will live in the East Wing. You will have everything you need. Your tuition will be paid. But you do not leave this estate without my permission. You serve as my father's primary care nurse until he passes, or until I say the debt is cleared. Do we have a deal? It was a golden cage, but considering the alternative was her brother in a shallow grave and her own life ruined by the O'Connors, it was the only choice she had. Deal, Khloe whispered. The transition was jarring. One day, Khloe was struggling to afford groceries in a drafty apartment. The next, she was a resident of the Rossi estate. Her bedroom in the East Wing was larger than her entire apartment, featuring a clawfoot tub and a balcony overlooking a private, frozen lake. Her patient, Arthur Rossi, was a shadow of the terrifying Don she had read about in the Chicago Tribune. He was a frail, sharp-tongued man confined to a medical bed in a heavily reinforced master suite. You're too skinny to be a nurse, the old man rasped on her third day, waving away the tray of heart-healthy food she brought him. They sent me a twig. And you're too stubborn to be a good patient, Khloe shot back, not missing a beat as she adjusted his IV line. Eat the vegetables, mister. Rossi, or I'm telling Arthur you're sneaking cigars again. Giovanni paused, a raspy chuckle escaping his thin lips. You got a spine. My son likes that. The last nurse cried when I yelled at her. I've dealt with worse men than you for a $5 tip, Khloe said, plumping his pillows. Over the next month, a strange rhythm developed. Khloe proved to be an exceptional nurse. She stabilized Giovanni's blood pressure, managed his pain with clinical precision, and, more importantly, kept him entertained with her dry wit. But the true danger of the estate wasn't the dying Don, it was his son. Arthur was a ghost in his own home. He worked grueling hours, managing a criminal empire from his soundproofed study. Often, Khloe wouldn't see him until 2 or 3 in the morning when she went to the kitchen for a glass of water. One particular Tuesday, a brutal snowstorm battered Chicago. Khloe walked into the dimly lit kitchen in her oversized sweatpants and a Loyola hoodie, only to find Arthur sitting at the marble island. He had a glass of Macallan in his hand, his shoulders slumped, the weight of the underworld visibly pressing down on him. Rough night? She asked softly, padding over to the refrigerator. Arthur looked up. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, were bloodshot. Alderman Fitzpatrick is getting greedy. Wants triple the usual kickback to keep the zoning permits for the dock expansions quiet. The O'Connors are backing him, pushing him to squeeze me. It was the most he had ever spoken to her about the business. What are you going to do? She asked, pouring a glass of water and sitting on the stool across from him. What I always do, Arthur said quietly, staring into his glass. Remove the obstacle. He looked up at her, really looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her relaxed, ununiformed state. You look normal. It's strange to see something so normal in this house. I am normal, Khloe said, a faint blush creeping up her neck. I'm just a waitress trying to get a degree. You haven't been just a waitress since the moment you looked me in the eye at the Oak Haven, Arthur murmured. He reached across the marble island, his large, calloused fingers brushing gently against the back of her hand. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to her chest. For a terrifying, exhilarating moment, the Mafia boss vanished. He was just a man, exhausted and lonely, reaching out to the only person in his life who didn't want a piece of his empire. Khloe didn't pull her hand away. She met his gaze, feeling the undeniable, dangerous pull of gravity between them. The spell was shattered by the vibrating buzz of Khloe's phone in her pocket. Arthur withdrew his hand instantly, the mask of the ruthless underboss snapping back into place. You should get some sleep, Khloe. My father has an early doctor's appointment tomorrow. Khloe nodded, her heart hammering as she practically fled the kitchen. Back in her room, she pulled her phone out. It was a blocked number. She accepted the call, pressing the phone to her ear. Hello? Khloe, thank God. Khloe froze. The voice was erratic, panicked, and painfully familiar. Ben? Ben, where the hell have you been? The O'Connors were going to kill me. I know. I'm sorry. Her brother babbled, his breathing heavy as if he were running. Listen to me very carefully, Khloe. You have to get out of wherever you are. You have to disappear. I can't just disappear, Ben. Arthur Rossi bought your debt. I'm working for him to pay it off. Dead silence fell over the line. Oh, God. Khloe, no. What? What did you do, Ben? The 50 grand. It wasn't a gambling debt, Ben whispered, his voice trembling with absolute terror. I got caught by the feds 3 months ago. Detective Miller from the Organized Crime Task Force. They threatened me with 20 years on a drug trafficking charge. They made me an informant. Khloe felt the blood drain from her face. The luxurious bedroom suddenly felt like a prison cell shrinking around her. What are you saying? I was stealing data from the O'Connor sportsbooks, Ben choked out. But Miller didn't care about the Irish. He wanted the Italians. He wanted the Rossis. He told me to use the debt as a cover, to let it slip to the Rossi family so they'd absorb me into their books, get me close to Arthur. You set me up? Khloe hissed, tears of betrayal stinging her eyes. No! I didn't know he'd take you. I thought he'd put me to work on the docks, Ben cried. Khloe, you are sleeping in the devil's house. The FBI is raiding the Lake Forest estate on Friday. Miller has a mole inside Arthur's crew. They know about the old man's failing health. They're coming to arrest Arthur for RICO violations, and if you are there, they will charge you as an accessory. The line went dead. Khloe stood frozen in the center of the opulent room, the phone slipping from her numb fingers. Friday. That was in 48 hours. She was falling in love with a man who had saved her life, only to discover that her own flesh and blood had orchestrated the destruction of his entire empire. And if Arthur found out she was the sister of a federal informant, the man who had gently touched her hand in the kitchen would not hesitate to put a bullet in her head. Thursday morning arrived with a suffocating weight. The sweeping grandfather clock in the estate's foyer ticked like a bomb counting down to Friday. Khloe's hands shook as she prepared Giovanni's morning medication. The old Don noticed immediately. He caught her wrist with surprising strength, his cloudy eyes sharp. You look like you're walking to the gallows, girl. What is it? Did Arthur do something? No, Mr. Rossi. Khloe swallowed the lump in her throat, her voice trembling. Arthur didn't do anything. She couldn't keep this poison inside. If she fled, the FBI would storm the Lake Forest estate. Giovanni, with his failing heart, wouldn't survive the stress of a raid and handcuffs. Arthur would be locked away in a federal penitentiary for the rest of his life. But if she stayed and confessed, Arthur might put a bullet in her for bringing a federal trap to his doorstep. At midnight, the house was dead silent. Khloe walked down the sprawling corridor to Arthur's study. A sliver of light spilled from beneath the heavy mahogany door. She didn't knock. She simply pushed it open. Arthur was standing by the window, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand, staring out at the frozen lake. He turned, his brow furrowing at the intrusion. Khloe, it's late. Is it my father? No, she said, stepping into the room and closing the door softly behind her. She stood rigid, her hands balled into fists at her sides. It's me. And it's Ben. Arthur's posture shifted. The exhausted man vanished, replaced instantly by the ruthless Chicago underboss. His eyes narrowed, analyzing her terrified stance. What about your brother? He didn't owe a gambling debt to the O'Connors, Khloe said, the words rushing out in a desperate, breathless wave. He was caught by Detective Miller of the Organized Crime Task Force. Ben is a federal informant. He used the debt to get absorbed into your books. He set us up. The silence in the study was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet that made the blood roar in Khloe's ears. Arthur didn't yell. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply placed his whiskey glass on the desk with a soft, deliberate clink. Say that again, Arthur whispered, his voice dangerously soft. The FBI is raiding this estate tomorrow morning, Khloe choked out, tears finally spilling over her lashes. Miller has a mole inside your crew. They know about your father's failing health. They're coming for you with RICO charges. I swear to God, Arthur, I didn't know until he called me last night. I could have run, but I couldn't leave you. I couldn't let them kill your father. Arthur stepped toward her, closing the distance until he was inches away. The sheer, terrifying gravity of his presence made her want to step back, but she forced herself to hold her ground. He reached out, his large hand gripping her jaw, tilting her face up so he could read every micro-expression in her eyes. He was looking for a lie. He found nothing but absolute, terrifying loyalty. Arthur's thumb brushed away a tear on her cheek. Who is the mole? Ben didn't know, Khloe whispered, but he said Miller had someone close to you. Arthur dropped his hand, his brilliant, tactical mind working at a frightening speed. Enzo, he muttered, turning back to his desk. Enzo was the one who finalized the paperwork for your brother's debt transfer. Enzo handles the payroll for the Southside docks. He's been leaking our financials. Arthur picked up his encrypted satellite phone and dialed a number. Tommy, wake up the security team. Prep my father for immediate transport. We have a rat. He paused, his dark eyes locking onto Khloe. And get the Gulfstream G650 ready at signature flight support out of Midway. We're leaving Chicago. The next 6 hours were a masterclass in organized chaos. Arthur Rossi did not panic. He operated with surgical precision. By 4 a.m., a convoy of black SUVs slipped out of the Lake Forest estate. Giovanni was safely loaded into a medically equipped transport van, grumbling about the early hour, but trusting his son implicitly. Arthur left a skeleton crew of newly hired, expendable guards at the estate, along with a mountain of falsified financial ledgers entirely signed by Enzo. If Detective Miller wanted a bust, he was going to get Arthur's traitorous enforcer handed to him on a silver platter. Khloe sat in the back of the armored Lincoln Navigator, watching the Chicago skyline recede in the rearview mirror. Arthur sat beside her, typing rapidly on a tablet, dismantling his local shell companies and shifting assets to offshore accounts in real time. As they pulled onto the private tarmac at Midway Airport, the sleek, white Gulfstream waiting under the floodlights, Arthur finally set the tablet down. He looked at Khloe, who was exhausted, terrified, and completely unmoored. You betrayed your own blood for me, Arthur said quietly, the heavy weight of the statement hanging in the air between them. My blood sold me to loan sharks and federal agents, Khloe replied, her voice remarkably steady. You bought my debt, and you treated me like a human being. Arthur reached across the leather seat, intertwining his fingers with hers. The cold, ruthless grip of the Mafia boss was gone, replaced by the warm, fierce hold of a man who had finally found an equal. Your debt is cleared, Khloe. You owe me nothing. Good, she said, squeezing his hand back as the SUV came to a halt. Because I'm not leaving. The Friday raid on the Lake Forest estate yielded nothing but empty safes and a deeply disgraced enforcer named Enzo. Thousands of miles away, in a secluded, sun-drenched villa in Tuscany, Arthur Rossi poured 2 glasses of vintage Macallan. He handed one to Khloe, the fearless waitress who had walked up to his table and altered the fate of a Chicago syndicate. She wasn't paying off a debt anymore. She was sitting beside the king.